USFRA wants you to engage. Today's farmers and ranchers have a story to tell about how food is grown and raised, and our app now makes it easy. Through the content in the news feed, you'll always be informed about the latest news in agriculture and from food companies. Engage connects to all major social media accounts, so you can easily share images, videos, articles, and more with one click. Go to fooddialogues.com/engage and download it now.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And if you watched this program last week and followed our coverage last week, you'll know that at the end of last week, some less than outstanding news for House Republicans as the Farm Bill went down on the House floor. But at the time, we really didn't know much in terms of a path forward. We know more now. We have seen the House of Representatives worked into a rule on a different bill, an extension that essentially gives this same farm bill that went down last week another month for leadership and for House Ag Committee Chair Mike Conaway to gin up support on some other issues as well. But basically, Phil, the moral of the story is by June 22nd, as things stand right now, the House needs to vote on the farm bill.
That, or they'll have to do another extension for that vote. Yeah, that gives them some time. You would think it'd be enough. There's this to address this immigration issue, and how that's gonna be done is anybody's guess at this point. But basically, we should have a good idea by June 11th on that issue, and that's because this discharge petition that's being used to force this immigration, a series of immigration votes on the House floor. They need to get the signatures by June 11th in order to trigger action by June the 25th, and that's how this farm bill is all tied up in that. So if they don't get the signatures, then this whole thing starts over, and so this could potentially resolve itself. But then where does the House Freedom Caucus go? And those conservative members who voted against the farm bill, some of them say they would have voted for it, except that this was their leverage to get action on immigration.
And Phil, as you mentioned, immigration really being the hold-up issue here for House Republicans trying to move this farm bill. And again, as you mentioned, just not a ton of resolution on the subject. There still doesn't seem to be any kind of consensus for any sort of legislative action, whether that just be putting folks on record for where they stand on the issue or trying to come to some kind of workable solution. It still seems like the ultimate end game is still up in the air at this point.
Very much so, and we're fast running out of time. Now, what's happened with the failure of the Farm Bill on the House floor last week is that the House and Senate are a little more on the same track now. The chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Pat Roberts, is still saying he wants to mark up in early June, put his bill before committee, which would be very different, at least in terms of the nutrition programs, from the House bill. He wants to have that in his committee in early June and then move to the floor later in June, possibly July, sometime before the August recess. And so that's where we are. And so as soon as you have to get those two bills out of the House and Senate before you can even start negotiations. And there hasn't been a lot of work, as far as we can tell, to date, in sort of trying to pre-negotiate some of these things, and they have some significant issues beyond nutrition. Not huge, not like we've seen in some farm bills past, but there are issues that are going to have to be negotiated.
Mm-hmm. So aside from just the farm bill developments as limited as they were, I do also want to touch on some things in regards to the appropriations process that unfolded this week. We continue to see action from both the House and the Senate on appropriations bills to fund the government in FY19 to make sure that the government does not, basically looking to avoid a government shutdown at the end of September. Will that appropriations process unfold through full House and Senate passage of appropriations bills rather than an omnibus spending bill in September? I'm certainly not willing to put money on it. Judging based on Phil's chuckle, I'm guessing he isn't either. But Phil, we do see action on some agricultural appropriations legislation, either directly funding USDA or tangentially related to it through other agencies, including some increased funding for rural broadband as well.
Right, and that's probably the focus on both. The most notable thing about both the spending bill for USDA and FDA on both the House and the Senate side is an extra tranche of spending for rural broadband expansion. We told you before the fiscal 2018 bill, which actually didn't pass until March, midway through the fiscal year, created this pilot grant and loan program for rural broadband, provided $600 million, and now the House and Senate have both added $550 million in one case, $425 million in the second case, a second tranche of spending for that. So we'll see. There's a lot of bipartisan support. And the other thing that's most noticeable about these bills that, for the most part, especially in the Senate, is they're so far relatively free of partisanship. A lot of, and that's partly because they've already agreed on the spending levels, and for now are agreeing to keep off some of the more controversial riders that we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit less action here in Washington this week, which certainly is not a very low bar there. There was quite a bit going on last week. I think we sat here in this video for a good 10 or 15 minutes talking about the week's events last week, but not quite as much action. But things are going to be quiet here in Washington for the next week. Lawmakers headed out of town for the Memorial Day recess, where they will be amongst all of you for the next week, discussing different farm policy and other topics back home. But we will keep an eye on news and developments here in Washington as
and get ready for June and July.
June and July will certainly be all kinds of fun, both for the lawmakers and for us. What kind of farm bill action that will entail, what kind of appropriations action. Plus, there's just all kinds of other things that folks seem to find to keep themselves busy here in Washington. And we'll be sure to keep an eye on all of that for you folks watching this from home. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.